Boy, I thank God for that. Seems like smarter man gets, the dumber he gets. Instead of building up people's immune systems naturally, which they need, and you get that germs, you get that sicknesses nowadays, everything, vaccinations, all this type of stuff. And so people get things on a more regular basis. But one of the signs of the last time is pestilence. We got a lot of pestilence going by. All right, Numbers chapter number 13. Finished chapter 11. God straightened some stuff out with Miriam and a man by the name of Aaron. They spoke against the man of God, and they used his wife. One thing I try to teach young preachers is to protect your wife and your family in ministry. I've seen so many, they push a woman out there and she's over all the women, she's over this, she's over that. And they stick her out there where she doesn't need to be. And when they can't get at the pastor, they'll get at his family. They'll shoot the family is what they do. And I tell them, you protect your wife. She is not the pastor's wife, a position. She is the wife of the pastor, all right? And she has one job to do, and that job is take care of the preacher. And she takes care of me. She does just right. So what happened was Miriam and Aaron spake against the man of God. Got to be careful doing that. Now, we're going to leave that this morning and look at chapter number 13. They're ready to go. All right, where are they? They are right at the edge of Canaan, right where God promised them. I want to read a couple of verses. Verse 1, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, it ought to tell Miriam and Aaron something real quick. If God's talking to the man of God, then he ought to be where he needs to be. So they laid their mouth on him. But God speaks to him again and said this, send thou men that they may search the land of Canaan. Notice what it said, which I give unto the children of Israel. I want you to notice the promise he gave. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to send out the 12 spies. We all know the story of them, and we'll go through that slowly. But at the same time, they're going to send out the 12 spies. But the Lord made a promise again. He said, the land of Canaan, that's where they're going to go into, which I give unto the children of Israel. You say, where did he say that in the Bible? He said, well, Genesis chapter number 9, verse 26, Genesis 12:7, Genesis 13:15, Genesis 17:8, Genesis 48:4, Exodus 12:25, Exodus 13:11. I need to go any farther with that. From Abraham on, he told Abraham, he said, every foot of ground you step on, I'm going to give it to you. Now, the Bible said that Abraham never received that blessing. He lived in tents instead of cities, but the Bible said he looked for a city with foundations, whose builder and maker is God. What he was looking for was the New Jerusalem, and thank God for that. But we find that God made them a promise. God said, I'm bringing you out of Egypt, not to stay in the desert, but to take you into Canaan. He said, it's waiting for you, all right? I've already given it to you. If God tells you he's going to give you something, take it. Now, he tells them to send out 12 spies. He names them in chapter number 13. Look at verse 12 again. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them. And Moses, by the commandment of the Lord, sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were heads of the children of Israel. Now, they're at Paran, they're right there in the Negev desert. They're just south of the Salt Sea, and they're ready to go into Canaan's land. So he said, I want you to take a ruler, a head of every one of these 12 tribes together, and you're going to send them into Canaan, and you're going to search it out. In verses 4 and following, he names every tribe. He names the individual that they sent. I'm just going to call you a name to a couple of them. One of them in verse number 6, the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. then you go down just a little bit farther in verse number 8, and he said of the tribe of Ephraim, Oshea, the son of Nun. Oshea, who is that? That's Joshua. So we find two of these that are going to bring the good report. But he names all of these, and these names, it doesn't matter who they sent out in particular, it just matters what they saw. So when he sends them out, verse number 17, we're going to drop on down. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get ye up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land of what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein. When he talked about the mountain, I wonder if that was Mount Nebo. The reason I say that, Moses never got to go into Canaan. First time he went into Canaan was on the Mount of Transfiguration, where him and Elijah were transfigured with the Lord, so he actually got to go in spiritually. But because he spake unadvisedly with his lips, God never let him go into Canaan, but he took him up on Mount Nebo where he could look out over the land of Canaan. He's talking about the mountain. So Mount Nebo was not actually in Canaan itself. He took him up. It's right on the border, but he could see, listen, Israel's not a big place. I think it's 21 miles across at the narrowest place. You'd be shocked how small the land of Israel is. That's why they will not give up the Golan Heights. What they've been trying to let them do is give that to the Jordanians and the Palestinians and that, and then they would have tanks and things that could set up on top of the Golan Heights and see all the way across the basins of Israel. Now, they can't do that. They've got to protect that property up there. But when he talked about the mountain, I thought about Mount Nebo because Moses got to look out over the whole land. It's one of the highest points in that area. But he told him to go up to the mountain, verse number 18, and see the land what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many. Verse 19, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, what the cities they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. He gives a pretty good description of what he wants them to look at. You say, why? Well, God makes us promises, but we have to make plans. God doesn't tell us, I'm going to give you that mountain, and you just sit down and wait till God gives it to you. We're getting ready to take a military in. There's going to be a lot of battles to be fought in Canaan. Canaan is not a type of heaven. Canaan is a type of the victorious Christian life. Because, listen, we get to heaven, we're not going to have battles. But at the same time, God's already promised. I gave you those verses all over Genesis and Exodus when he brought them out of Egypt. He said, boy, I'm going to take you over to the good land. All right, we're going to go over there, spend a little time at Mount Sinai, then we're going to go to the north from Sinai. We're going to give you that land. Now, he said, I want you to go check it out. God's already told them that it is a land flowing with milk and honey. Told them it was a very rich, rich land. He already told them, these 7 tribes, that they're going to have to fight once they get in there. He named all of those. But we find in here that he sent them out, and he told them, said, I want you to look at the land. The people, hey, are they weak or strong? Is there a few of them or a lot of them? The land, is it good or bad? The cities, are they tents or strongholds? He says, the land fat or lean? Is there wood in it? He said, now, I want you to go and be of good courage. Be of good courage. What's he doing? He's telling them, you put your faith in me. You're going to have to fight. But I want you to be of good courage. We find that encouragement in the Lord. In the ministry, we've got so many people that are they're quitting. They're leaving mission fields. They're quitting the pastors. I find a lot of discouragement out there. I believe God's men and God's people need to find their encouragement in the promises of the Lord. You need to encourage yourself. You need to be a self-starter. If you've got somebody else always having to pull your rope, after a while that gets tiresome. They'll quit pulling your rope. You ever had a lawnmower that wouldn't start, Brother Carl? Aggravating this thing. Nothing any more aggravating than a small gas engine that will not start, won't run. I mean, after a while, you know what I did with? Hey, I just took one and I threw it as far as I could throw it, and it bounced across the yard. Didn't make it start. Didn't make me feel any better. But I got tired of tugging on it. Now, if you've got to depend on somebody else to start you all the time, eventually they're going to get discouraged trying to start you, and they're just going to let you sit, all right? Learn to find your encouragement in the Lord. That's a good thing about devotional time. I know most of you don't have the time that I have to spend in devotion in the morning, but at the same time, hey, when you're driving to work, you can find your encouragement in the Lord. When you get up in the morning, you can find your encouragement in the Lord. Now, he told them, I want you to go in and be encouraged, all right? Why? I've already told you I'm going to give it to you. It's yours. All you got to do is get in there and take it, all right? So we find also strategy. You have to have in war a strategy. You have to have a plan that's going to work and eventually is going to win. You've got to do that. That's why you've got generals. These are all heads of tribes. These are not water carriers. These are heads of these tribes. He said, these are young men, they're strong men, but they're heads of the tribe. And he said, I want you to go see what you're going to have to do in order to take this thing. So he sends them in. Verse 21, so they went up, searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, as men come to Hamath, and they ascended by the south and came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, Shephi, hey, all these big names, isn't that pretty? And the children of Anak are there. Hey, they're the giants. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, so it's an old place there. But verse 23 says, they came unto the brook of Eshcol. Eshcol means a cluster. Eshcol is a place we find several times in the Bible, and they cut down thence a branch with one cluster of grapes. You ever cut off clusters of grapes? Some of them that big around, about that tall, boy, and you just clip them and hold that thing up. Boy, isn't it nice to get a good cluster of concord grapes. Most of your muscadine and scupperdine, they grow individually on the vines. If you've got concord grapes, I've watched them in vineyards, boy, just where they snip them and dropping them in, just cutting them off. All right. What they did, they took a cluster and they bear it between two upon a staff. It was so big, they put a pole between the shoulders of two men to carry that. I saw a picture, and I don't know if it was photoshopped or not, but they showed two men over in Israel carrying a cluster of grapes that had to be that big around and about that tall. I've never seen it. Looked like 1 million grapes on that thing and had it on the pole. I say they probably still have that over there because they had it this day. It took two men to carry this one cluster of grapes. You're talking about a place blessed. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. And the place was called the brook of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. Took them 40 days. You ever notice how many 40s you got in the Bible? The Lord was up on the Mount of Temptation 40 days. You find them 40 years in the wilderness. You find it took the spies a month and a half to walk over that land. They had to be careful. They didn't want to be discovered. They weren't ready to go to war. You're talking about 12 men going all over and spying out this land and coming back. So it took them a month and a half to do that. And they returned after 40 days. Verse 26, and they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel, under the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. Verse 27, and they told him, Moses, and said, we have come into the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. What they said was, it's everything God said it was. This thing is flowing with milk and honey. This is a rich. Hey, you go to Israel, you think of desert. When you go to Israel, the valley of Jezreel is called the breadbasket of Israel. They grow 2 crops a year. I mean, the plowers almost overtake the reapers. When they reap those fields, they're coming right in behind and replowing those. They can feed everybody. It's called the breadbasket of Israel. So they said it's everything God said. Boy, isn't that a blessing? When God's promises are there for you, it's everything God said. But there's a word in verse 28, nevertheless. We have a problem, Houston. It's everything God said it was. God said, you be of good courage. It's yours for the taking. He told him all through Genesis, Exodus, the land is yours. I give it to you. It belongs to you. You can have it. It's a rich land. It's a good land. And they come in, and that word, nevertheless, they said it's everything God said, nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land. And the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. They've got the high ground. We're going to have to fight the Amalekites, but then we're going to have to take the high ground away from them. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Canaan, or Jordan. So they said, we're going to have a hard time with this. These people are strong. Matter of fact, the Amorites had chariots of iron. So we find that they were a very powerful nation. They were actually set up kind of like Greece was. You remember the story of the Spartans and the 400 Spartans and all this type of stuff. They were city-states. Now, they had people that surrounded those cities, but they were actually city-states all across Canaan. You notice they were taking one city after the other one and having to take the walls down on these cities. So they were city-states, very strong. They built these walls extremely high. So they were well fortified, and he said, hey, there's trouble there. Verse number 30, and Caleb stilled the people before the Lord. Now, he stilled the people. Why? I believe that when they made this announcement about who was there and how much of a battle it was going to be, that the people started murmuring and complaining. Matter of fact, you find out chapter 14, verse 1, all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. So we find that they stirred up the people against God and against Moses. Moses told them, you be encouraged, you go in, you look it over, you come back, we'll devise a plan whereby we go in and take it. And they said, we don't believe you're able to. Caleb stilled the people. I thank God for Caleb. But he stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. At this particular time, he was about 45 years of age. He was a man of full strength. He was a man of war. After 40 years, when he comes back, the Bible said that he was 85 years of age when he said, I want that mountain. And he said, I'm still able to go in and out and make war just as I used to. So we find about a 45-year-old man. And he said, we're able to take it. Verse 31, but the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. That's not what God told them. God told them, I'm going to give you the land. You know, God can save by many, or he can save by few. Take Gideon. Gideon had a pretty good sized army, and God thinned them down to 300. Right? He said the Midianites, they camped, so many of them, they were camping out of sight. Just tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of them spread out, and God took 30 men. That's all he needed was 30. So we find that God can save with many or God can save with few. It doesn't matter how big they are. There's an old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Well, I found out the bigger they are, the harder they fall, but it takes a lot more to knock them over. All right? It's not that easy to knock them over. But what they said, what Caleb said, hey, we're well able to do that. He said, we'll go in, we'll just take that thing. God told us we could have it. We'll go in and we're strong. But you need to understand that the Israeli army at this time had never been in battle. They didn't know what they had. They counted them over 600,000 footmen. They had a good-sized army. But at the same time, they'd never been tested. An army that's never been tested might not be an army that can be trusted, all right? So what they did, and this is the leadership of the army. This army was made up of tens of thousands out of each one of these tribes. And the leaders of those tribes said, hey, we don't want to mess with them. They're too strong for us. We're stronger than we. Verse 32, and they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel. They brought up an evil report. You find actually 10 of them made an evil report. 2 made a good report, Caleb and Joshua. But we find here that they spoke evil of that land that God had said was such a wonderful land. They looked at it and it was everything God said. But at the same time, they looked at themselves instead of looking at God. Why do people fall so many times? I believe they get their eyes on self and off of God. I think God's able to do anything, anytime, anywhere. I've still got some things I'm praying over. God's time, not my time. But I believe one of these days God's going to do what God needs to do. All right, he'll be God on time. He'll do what he needs to. I don't give up on it. Not to this. I'm not saying that I couldn't in the future. If I get my eyes on my frailty, then you get your eyes on yourself, you get them off of God. If you get your eyes off of yourself, you get them on God. So what they did, they brought up an evil report of what God said was good. They said, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. Giants. I think of Goliath. Goliath was about, the Bible said he was 6 cubits in a span. A span's about 7 inches. A span is a normal man's hand from the tip of that little finger to the tip of that thumb is what they call a span. You're looking at about 7.5 inches on a man my size. A cubit was about 18 inches. It could run from 15 to 18 inches. Of course, it was the length from the tip of the elbow to the tip of the finger on the reigning king. If you measured from here to here, you got almost exactly 18 inches. So 6 cubits was 9 feet, and a span was probably about 7 inches. So you're looking at a man that was 9 feet 7 inches tall. Now, if you look at that wall right there, that wall is just a little bit over 9 feet. That's to the seam up there. So if I walked up here and I looked up to the ceiling, I would probably see the top of Goliath's head. The Bible gives the weight of his spear and the weight of his shield. Talks about the size of that man. He had 4 brothers. Somebody said that's why David picked up 5 smooth stones. There were 5 sons of the giant at Gath. And matter of fact, they went back in and they killed 4 more of them. They cleaned them out eventually. But hey, you're talking about big people. I'm not talking about 7 feet tall. The Bible gives it gives the size of the man's bed. Why would the Bible give the size of the man's bed? Because the bed was built for the man, and his bed was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. I'm talking about these were giants. Hey, they looked at him, they said, oh no, we ain't messing with that guy. You know, I've seen some big people, never that big. So he said this, these are men of great stature. Notice what he said. There we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Now, I'm going to finish up with verse number 33. He made a statement here. The giants are there, but he said in our own sight, we were as grasshoppers. What they did, they measured themselves against the task that was at hand. I think you need to measure the task that is at hand by the God that sent you. All right. God's able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that worketh in us. So they said when we saw them, we looked in the mirror, so to speak, and saw ourselves. And, hey, we were grasshoppers. I mean, that's how big these people were up there that they were watching, walking around. You know, we've seen all the old comics and everything of the giants and all this type of stuff. Hey, these people were actual giants. You go back to the book of Genesis, the Bible said there were giants in those days. By the way, the giants in Genesis 6 were not the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. They said those were men of renown. But it said that there were giants in those days. They weren't giants. A lot of people say the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men were giants. They don't even read their Bible right. The Bible just said, and in those days there were giants in the land. So we're talking about giants. But he made another statement, and so we were in their sight. We were grasshoppers, but when they looked at us, we were grasshoppers. That's not what they were looking at. Over in the book of Joshua, chapter number 2, let me just read a couple of verses here and there. And over in the book of Joshua, chapter number 2, I want to show you what was going on the other side of the fence. Joshua chapter 2, verse 9. And she said unto the men, this is Rahab. This is the second time that the spies have come in, all right? Rahab said to the men, the Bible said, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Now here's why, verse 10, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. That tells me 40 years later, this is the second time these spies go in there, 40 years later, these people in the land have been looking for them for 40 years, and their hearts were fainting. They were scared to death, not because of the power of Israel, but because the God of Israel, it said how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. They were afraid of the God that these Israelites were not, they weren't seeing God the way the enemy was. You see what was going on? These people were behind those walls scared to death. They trembled. I'm talking about giants because of the God. Over in the book of Exodus, chapter number 15, I'm going to read one more little portion to you. Exodus 15, get my verses right. I'm going to read 14 through 18 out of Exodus 15. And the people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Philistia. That's Canaan. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, shall take hold upon them, and all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them by the greatness of thine arm. They shall be as still as stone, till thy people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over which thou hast purchased. Verse 17, he said, Thou shalt bring them in, and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary of the Lord, which thy hands have established, and the Lord shall reign forever and ever. Go back to Numbers 13. That when they got their eyes off of God, they saw the land. The land was everything God said it was. Boy, what a wonderful place it was. And boy, it had a lot of big cities and it had a lot of big giants in that place. And they said we'd be as grasshoppers in our own sight. And then because of the way they saw themselves without God, grasshoppers, that means, hey, God's nothing. We're looking at self. They said they look upon us as grasshoppers. No, Canaanites were looking at their God. All they had to do was what Caleb said. Caleb said this. He stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. All they had to do was walk in. And it was there. Now, we're going to look a little bit farther. This whole generation, other than two men, this generation are going to have to die in the wilderness. They went into the land for 40 days and a year for every day. They're going to have to live in that wilderness now, just simply because they failed to take God at His word. All they had to do was walk in, and whether they would have been in milk and honey, they would have owned that land, and God said He'd reign over them. But over in the book of Exodus, God called it the sanctuary of the Lord. That word sanctuary is capitalized. You got to watch out in the Bible when it capitalizes something. Not just talking about a sanctuary, but that was a sanctuary that belonged to God. God had already given it to them. It was theirs. They just had to go in, fight a few battles, take that thing, and they could have lived there. But they got their eyes off of God and got them on their circumstances. If you're not careful, your circumstances will dictate who and what you are, and that will dictate what you can or cannot do. With God, all things are possible, amen? And that's all they had to do. Good lesson in there for you and I. Just, I'm going to deal with it a little bit later in the service. We live in hard times spiritually. But I thank God, the God that we serve today is the same God that said, I'll give it to you. Well, it's a type of victorious Christian living. We can live a victorious Christian life in 2023. You can let your light so shine among men that they'll see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we love you. We thank you for the admonition here. What a shame that a whole generation had to die. Lord, they could have gone in, and that 40 years could have been the best 40 years that they lived in their life. I pray, Father, you bless now the service to come. Be with our people that are sick. Give us a good day today. We love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, going to the prayer room.